Reed Tabner had seen horrors most men wouldn't believe. Cities burning under orbital bombardment, whole civilizations turned to dust. He'd fought in wars where the lucky ones died first, and the rest spent their last days as slaves in the dark hulls of Draxith warships. He had watched friends disappear, their screams cut short as metal doors slammed shut, never to be heard from again. But this was worse. The two women knelt before him, their wrists bound in thick iron cuffs, chains coiling at their feet like the remnants of a broken noose. Their bodies bore the marks of captivity, torn fabric, bruised skin, the quiet tension of those who had learned to expect the worst. And standing beside them, savoring the moment, was the Draxith warlord who had orchestrated it all. Jaresh, a mountain of muscle wrapped in dark, segmented armor, his reptilian face split into something resembling a grin. His jagged teeth gleamed under the dim lights of the throne room, his red eyes glinting with amusement. "A reward," Kharash rumbled, voice thick with mockery, "for your service." The words tasted like bile in Reed's throat. He had fought alongside the Draxith in this war, not because he trusted them, but because the alternative was worse. The enemy they had faced, the Jurak Dominion, were planet killers, monsters. The kind that wiped out entire species without hesitation. The Draxith, at least, had a reason for their brutality. A code, if you could call it that. But this was no different than the slavers he had spent his life hunting down. Reed forced his fists to unclench. Every instinct screamed at him to act, to reach for the knife strapped to his thigh, to put a bullet between Jaresh's smug eyes. But there were too many of them. A dozen heavily armed warriors lined the chamber, their plasma rifles resting against thick, armored shoulders. If he moved too fast, this would turn into a bloodbath, one he wouldn't walk away from. And neither would they. His gaze flicked down to the two women. The first, the taller one, had deep violet skin and sharp, angular features. Her silver-white eyes met his with raw hatred, but there was no fear in them. She knelt because they had forced her to, but her back was straight, her shoulders squared. If they freed her now, she would fight until her last breath. The second, smaller but no less striking, had emerald green skin laced with golden markings. She wasn't trembling, but there was a quiet wariness in her gaze. Calculating, analyzing, waiting. She wasn't just watching him, she was watching everything. The guards, the exits, the way Jaresh shifted his weight. She was looking for an opening. They weren't broken. Not yet. "You hesitate," Jaresh drawled, tilting his head. "I thought humans had simpler tastes. Take one. They are fine specimens, are they not?" Reed ignored the way his blood burned. He had seen Draxith slave pens before. The screams, the smell of scorched flesh, the endless corridors of locked cells filled with the ones who had already given up. He had seen what happened to those who didn't get chosen. His stomach twisted. "Choose," Jaresh said, amusement creeping into his voice, "or I will choose for you." Reed exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Then he moved, not for a weapon, but for something else. His hand went to his belt. In a single fluid motion, he drew his combat knife, its black steel gleaming under the flickering light. Gasps filled the chamber as he knelt. Not before Jaresh, not in submission, but in front of them. The violet-skinned woman, Belra, stiffened as the cold metal of the blade touched her wrist. For a split second, he saw her brace for pain, for betrayal. Then, with a flick of his wrist, the blade sliced through her chains. The cuffs fell away with a metallic clang. Reed shifted immediately, cutting through the emerald-skinned woman's bonds before anyone could react. Jaresh's expression shifted from amusement to fury. "I choose neither," Reed said, rising to his feet, knife still in hand. "I choose their freedom." A heavy silence fell over the chamber. Velra stared at him, rubbing her freed wrists, her expression unreadable. Ceres blinked once, her golden eyes flicking between him and Jaresh, still processing what had just happened. Jaresh exhaled slowly. When he spoke, his voice was almost impressed. Almost. "You insult me, human." "No," Reed said. "I'm showing you mercy." For a single stretched-out moment, no one moved. The guards gripped their weapons, tension thick enough to snap. Then Jaresh smiled. It was a slow, dangerous thing. "You are a fool," he murmured, "and now you die." The first guard lifted his rifle. Velra was already moving. Ceres followed a second later. Reed didn't have time to think. He grabbed Ceres by the wrist and yanked her behind him as Velra lunged, bare hands wrapping around the nearest guard's weapon. A brutal twist, a sickening crack, and suddenly she was armed. The chamber exploded into chaos. Reed fired his sidearm, dropping a Draxith before he could raise his plasma rifle. Velra ducked beneath another swing, driving the butt of her stolen weapon into his throat. Ceres moved fast, her smaller frame darting between armored giants, her hands moving with deadly precision as she seized a fallen knife. Jaresh roared, reaching for the massive blade at his waist. "Go!" Reed barked. "Now!" They ran. Smoke filled the air as plasma bolts tore through the chamber walls, sending shards of stone raining down around them. Velra was at his side, Ceres just behind, their footfalls echoing against the cold metal floors. Reed didn't look back. They had seconds, maybe less, before the full weight of the warlord's fury came crashing down on them, and when it did, there wouldn't be anywhere left to run. But that was a problem for later. Right now, they had to survive. The jungle swallowed them whole. Reed Tavener sprinted through the undergrowth, his breath sharp, his pulse hammering in his ears. Behind him, Velra and Ceres moved like ghosts, silent despite their speed. The moment they'd escaped the Draxith stronghold, they had hit the tree line at full force, the darkness of the jungle their only salvation. Plasma bolts hissed through the air, scorching bark, slicing through the thick canopy above. The Draxith were relentless. Heavy reptilian bodies crashed through the underbrush, their guttural snarls and bellowed commands, sending birds shrieking into the sky. The hunt was on. Reed barely ducked in time as a bolt seared past his head, heat licking at his skin. They were too exposed. They needed cover. Needed time. Up ahead, the jungle thickened, the trees growing denser, the foliage nearly impenetrable. It was their best shot. He pivoted sharply. "There!" Velra was already ahead of him, her long stride carrying her forward with a warrior's grace. Ceres followed close behind, her smaller frame moving with an uncanny quickness, her golden eyes flicking toward every shadow, every shifting branch. Reed forced his burning legs to keep moving. The uneven terrain threatened to trip him with every step. Exposed roots, tangled vines, jagged rocks hidden beneath the ferns. But stopping meant death. The roar of plasma fire faded behind them, replaced by the steady hum of the jungle. The further they ran, the thicker the air became, damp with humidity, filled with the scent of earth and rain. The jungle was alive. Chittering insects, unseen predators rustling in the brush. Distant howls carried on the wind. After what felt like an eternity, they broke into a small clearing. A fallen tree, massive and ancient, lay across the space, its roots jutting upward like skeletal fingers, a natural barricade. Reed vaulted over it first, landing hard and rolling onto his feet. Velra followed without hesitation, moving like a shadow. Ceres hesitated for half a second, then she was over, landing smoothly beside them. Silence. Reed crouched, catching his breath, pulse still hammering. His body screamed at him, every muscle burning. He pressed a hand against his ribs, feeling the sharp twinge of what was likely a bruise forming. Velra was already scanning the jungle, her sharp silver eyes narrowing. "They won't stop," she murmured. "Not until they find us." "Then we make sure they don't," Reed said, forcing himself to focus. He turned to Ceres, who was kneeling beside the fallen tree, running her fingers across the moss-covered bark. Ceres? She didn't look up. Water's close. Reed frowned, following her gaze. The ground sloped downward just beyond the tree, and now that he was listening, really listening, he could hear it. A faint but steady sound. Moving water. A river. Reed exhaled. Good. That's our way out. Velra was already shaking her head. It's too exposed. If they follow us, they'll pick us off the second we hit open water. Ceres met her gaze. They'll follow us anywhere. At least this way. We control the distance. Velra didn't argue. She didn't like it, but she knew Ceres was right. Reed pushed himself upright. Let's move. They stayed low, slipping through the foliage like ghosts. The jungle pressed in around them, every shifting shadow a potential threat, every snapped twig an alarm waiting to be triggered. The air was thick, humid, heavy with the weight of an approaching storm. The river came into view a few minutes later, a dark ribbon of water cutting through the jungle, its surface rippling with unseen currents. It was deeper than Reed had hoped, faster than he would have liked, but it would have to do. We swim, he said. Ceres was already moving, stepping into the water without hesitation. Velra hesitated just for a moment before following. Reed took one last look at the jungle behind them. No movement, no sound, but he knew better than to believe they had lost the Draxeath. Not yet. Then he stepped into the river, the cold shock of the water stealing the breath from his lungs. He dove beneath the surface, the world above vanishing into silence. The river had saved them, but it had done so cruelly. Reed Taverner's body felt like it had been put through a meat grinder. His lungs burned as he dragged himself onto the muddy riverbank, coughing out the last remnants of water from his throat. His fingers dug into the wet earth, grasping at something solid, anything to remind himself that he was still alive. Velra emerged next, pulling herself up with the grace of someone who refused to be defeated. Water streamed from her violet skin, her silver eyes scanning the jungle before she even fully caught her breath. Always alert, always ready. Ceres followed moments later, her smaller frame trembling slightly as she gripped a tangle of exposed roots and pulled herself up. She knelt there for a second, panting, her golden-marked skin slick with river water, her usually sharp gaze unfocused. None of them spoke. The jungle around them hummed with life, the chirping of unseen insects, the distant screeches of nocturnal predators, the slow rustling of the wind through thick foliage. But what mattered most was what wasn't there. No shouting Draxeath warriors, no distant hum of pursuit drones, no telltale whine of plasma weapons cutting through the humid air. They had lost them, at least for now. Reed sat back against the damp earth, closing his eyes for just a second, feeling the deep ache settling into his limbs. His ribs throbbed from where he'd slammed into a rock underwater. His legs felt like dead weight, but he forced himself upright. Pain was secondary, survival came first. Velra wiped a hand down her face, exhaling sharply. "We can't stay here," she said, voice still breathless. "They won't give up that easily." Reed nodded, but his mind was already working through the problem. "We will move," he said, voice hoarse. "But not yet. We need to figure out where the hell we are first." Ceres was still kneeling, gripping her arms as if trying to steady herself. Her golden eyes flicked up toward the jungle, unfocused for a moment before narrowing. "I saw mountains before we hit the water," she murmured. "If we reach higher ground, we'll have the advantage." Velra gave a low, humorless chuckle. "Higher ground also makes us visible." "Staying here makes us dead," Ceres shot back, sharper this time. Reed wiped a hand over his face. He didn't have the energy for arguing. "We move," he decided. "Slow, quiet. The Draxeath will expect us to run blind. We won't give them the satisfaction." Velra gave a curt nod. Ceres just exhaled and pushed herself to her feet. They slipped into the jungle like ghosts. The terrain was unforgiving. The damp soil sucked at their boots. Vines coiled around their arms like grasping fingers, and unseen creatures scuttled in the darkness just beyond their vision. The air was thick with moisture, the scent of rain and earth clinging to them. Reed kept his ears sharp, listening for anything that didn't belong. A snapped branch, the whir of a drone, the low murmur of alien voices. But all he heard was the jungle itself, alive and indifferent to their suffering. They moved in silence, instinctively keeping a staggered formation. Velra ahead, Reed in the middle, Saris covering the rear. It wasn't something they had discussed, but it happened naturally. Velra was the fighter, the one who would take the first strike. Saris was the observer, the one who saw danger before it came. Reed? He was somewhere in between. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. A massive fallen tree lay at the center, its thick roots jutting into the air like skeletal fingers. It provided just enough cover to be useful. Reed gestured toward it. "We stop here. 10 minutes. No fire." Velra crouched by the edge of the clearing, scanning the darkness beyond. Saris didn't even hesitate before sinking down against the tree, her breath still unsteady. Reed exhaled and leaned against the rough bark, rubbing at his shoulder. The exhaustion was settling deep now, curling into his muscles, making every movement feel like wading through quicksand. For a moment no one spoke. Then Ceres broke the silence. "Why did you do it?" Reed turned his head toward her. She was watching him, her golden eyes unreadable in the dim light. She didn't clarify, but she didn't need to. "Why did you free us? Why didn't you choose one of us like they wanted? Why didn't you run?" Reed exhaled slowly, running a hand through his still wet hair. He should have expected the question. "I've seen what happens to people in chains," he said finally. His voice was quieter now. "I wasn't going to let that happen again." Velra, who had been silent until now, flicked her gaze toward him. "Again!" Reed hesitated, then after a moment he spoke. "When I was 19, I was part of a crew that raided a slaver outpost," he said, keeping his voice even. "We thought we were doing something good, thought we were saving people." A bitter chuckle escaped him. "We were wrong. Another crew hit the outpost the same night. No coordination, no plan, just chaos. The slavers panicked, started killing prisoners before anyone could reach them." He didn't look at them as he spoke. He didn't have to. By the time we got inside, half of them were already dead. Silence. The jungle hummed around them, alive, but none of them moved. Sirius swallowed. "And the rest?" Reed finally met her gaze. "The ones we saved?" His lips pressed into a thin line. They were grateful, but you could still see it in their eyes. That knowledge that no matter how far they ran, how free they were, something had been taken from them that they would never get back. Velra's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her silver eyes. A quiet understanding. "We're not them," she said, voice softer than he had expected. Reed let out a slow breath. "No," he said, "you're not." He leaned back against the tree, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on them. He didn't trust easily, never had. But as he glanced between Velra and Saris, he realized something. He wanted to. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The night was thick with the weight of exhaustion, but none of them could sleep. The jungle loomed around them, vast and indifferent, its dense canopy cutting out the sky. A storm was coming. Reed could smell it in the air, feel the shifting pressure pressing against his skull. It would rain soon, and when it did, the Draxith's search would grow harder. The downpour would wash away their footprints, mask their scent. They just had to last until morning. Reed sat with his back against the massive fallen tree, his sidearm resting loosely in his grip, but his focus wasn't on the weapon. It was on the two alien women who had, only hours ago, been nothing more than strangers with shackles around their wrists. Now things were different. Velra crouched a few feet away, her body tense, silver-white eyes sharp and watchful. She had barely spoken since they had escaped, but even in silence, she was a presence that couldn't be ignored. She was a warrior, through and through, strong, resilient. She wore her defiance like armor, her hatred for the Draxith burning just beneath the surface. Cirrus sat cross-legged near the base of the tree, her smaller frame wrapped in the damp remains of her tunic, golden markings glistening faintly under the faint moonlight filtering through the leaves. Where Velra was rigid, Cirrus was still, but not weak. She didn't fidget, didn't tremble. She was a quiet observer, always thinking, always calculating. They weren't like anyone he had met before. Reed exhaled, rolling his sore shoulder before shifting his attention to them. "We should at least know each other's names before we end up dying in the same ditch," he muttered. Velra's sharp gaze flicked to him, unreadable. Ceres raised an eyebrow. "That's optimistic." Reed smirked. "I'm known for it." A brief pause. Then, after a moment, Velra said, "Velra." No embellishments, no hesitation, just her name, given like a statement of fact. Ceres glanced at her, then at Reed. "Ceres." Reed gave a slow nod. Reed Taverner. The names settled between them, solidifying something unspoken. They weren't allies yet. Not really. But they weren't strangers anymore, either. The moment didn't last long. A distant howl cut through the night, deep and guttural. Something was hunting. Velra tensed instantly, fingers curling into fists. Ceres turned her head slightly, listening. Reed sighed. "I was hoping for at least 10 minutes of peace." Velra didn't look away from the darkness beyond the clearing. "Hope is a weakness." Reed tilted his head, watching her. "Hope is why you're still alive." She didn't respond. Sirius stood up, stretching. "We should move soon. If that storm rolls in, we'll have an advantage, but not if we wait too long." Reed agreed, but his body had other plans. The moment he tried to stand, a sharp pain flared in his ribs, and he let out a low grunt. He barely reacted in time when Cirrus was suddenly there, pressing 2 fingers against his side, just below the injured area. He stiffened at the touch, but she didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she didn't care. "Bruised," she murmured, her voice clinical, "possibly cracked. Not bad enough to slow you down, but bad enough to get worse if you're careless." Reed arched an eyebrow. "You a doctor?" Ceres glanced up at him, her golden eyes catching the dim light. "Something like that." Velra was watching the exchange, her silver gaze unreadable. Reed exhaled sharply, but let Ceres press against another spot along his ribs, testing. Her hands were smaller than his, but strong, steady. He didn't remember the last time someone had touched him like this, not with violence, not with cold medical detachment, but something in between. Then Ceres paused, tilting her head slightly. "You tense every time I touch here," she noted. Reed gave her a half smirk. "Maybe I'd just like the attention." Ceres blinked. Then, to his surprise, she let out a quiet huff of amusement. Velra rolled her eyes. "Humans are insufferable?" Reed chuckled, wincing slightly. "You just figuring that out?" The atmosphere shifted, not by much, but enough. Something unspoken passed between them, something heavier than words. Reed wasn't an idiot. He had seen the way Velra watched him, how her eyes lingered on him when she thought he wasn't looking. He had felt the way Ceres moved closer without even realizing it, drawn by something she probably didn't fully understand yet. And he wasn't blind to himself either. They were different. But something about them pulled at him, in a way he hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. He wasn't sure what it meant, but he was damn sure that, whatever this was, it had already started. The jungle was restless that night. The storm had passed, leaving behind damp earth and a sky smeared with remnants of lightning, but the tension in the air hadn't broken. It clung to them, thick and suffocating, as if the very trees were holding their breath. Reed Taverner sat near the faint embers of their fire, sharpening his knife more out of habit than necessity. The rhythmic scrape of metal against stone was the only sound between them, aside from the occasional rustle of unseen creatures shifting in the undergrowth. Velra stood a few feet away, arms crossed, her back rigid. Her violet skin caught the flickering light, casting deep shadows across her sharp features. She hadn't spoken in a while, not since they had stopped for the night. She hadn't needed to. Cirrus sat on the opposite side of the fire, her golden eyes reflecting the dim glow, her emerald green skin still damp from the rain. She wasn't watching Reed, she was watching Velra, quiet, patient, waiting. Something was coming. Reed could feel it in the way Velra's shoulders tensed, in the way her silver-white eyes flicked toward him when she thought he wasn't looking. She was on the verge of something. And then, without warning, she spoke. "You love her." Her voice was steady, but there was something beneath it, something frayed at the edges. Reed looked up, blinking. "What?" Velra's arms tightened across her chest. "Cirrus," she said, as if clarifying something obvious. "You love her." Reed exhaled slowly, setting the knife down. "And that's a problem because?" Velra's jaw clenched. She was silent for a moment, staring at the fire as if the words she needed were buried in the embers. Then she turned away, her shoulders tense, her whole body wound tight like a coiled wire. "Because she hesitated, her voice faltering. "I can't do this." Reed pushed himself up, ignoring the ache in his ribs. He stepped toward her, carefully, but she didn't turn to face him. "Velra, I don't know how—" The words came out sharper than she had probably intended, but there was no taking them back now. She exhaled, shaking her head slightly, then finally turned, her silver eyes locking onto his. "I don't know how to trust this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "How to trust you." Reed stilled. Velra had never been one to admit weakness. She wore her strength like armor, kept her emotions locked behind iron walls. But now, standing there in the dim firelight, her violet skin shimmering with the remnants of rain, she looked different. Not weak, just tired. Reed's grip loosened, his fingers brushing against his side where his knife usually rested. He wanted to reach for her, but he didn't. Not yet. "You don't have to know how," he said softly. "That's not how this works." Velra let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "You make it sound so easy." "It's not," he admitted, "but running doesn't make it easier." Her fingers curled into fists at her sides. "I'm not running." Reed tilted his head slightly. "Aren't you?" Velra's breath hitched, just barely, but he caught it. The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy. Ceres, who had been silent this whole time, finally stood. She stepped forward, her golden gaze shifting between them, assessing, considering. Then, with deliberate slowness, she reached out. Her fingers brushed against Velra's wrist, just a whisper of contact, the barest suggestion of touch. Velra tensed, but she didn't pull away. Cirrus's voice was quiet but steady. "Not everything ends in loss." Velra's breath was uneven now, her posture wavering, as if she were standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable. Reed took a step closer, his voice softer now. "Let us show you." Velra didn't move, didn't speak, but she didn't step away either. And for now, that was enough. The fire had burned down to embers, casting only a faint glow against the damp jungle floor. The scent of wet earth, charred wood, and the lingering metallic tang of ozone from the earlier storm filled the air. Beyond their small clearing, the jungle pulsed with distant sounds. Creatures stirring in the undergrowth, water dripping from thick leaves, the hushed rhythm of a world indifferent to their struggles. Reed Taverner sat on the ground, one knee bent, sharpening his knife with slow, deliberate strokes. The sound of steel against stone was steady, methodical, a small attempt to ground himself in something tangible. Across from him, Ceres leaned back against the base of a massive gnarled tree, her golden eyes half-lidded, thoughtful. The rain had left her emerald-green skin damp, her golden markings gleaming faintly in the firelight. She looked calm, but Reed knew better. Velra stood at the edge of the clearing, her back partially turned to them. The faint light caught on the curves of her violet skin, illuminating the sharp angles of her shoulders, the tension in the way she held herself. She hadn't spoken much since their argument, hadn't met his gaze since the moment she admitted she didn't know how to trust. Reed had given her space, waiting for her to work through whatever storm was raging inside her. But she was still there. That had to mean something. The quiet stretched between them, heavy and thick. Then, finally, Velra exhaled sharply and turned, crossing her arms. "This is a mistake," she muttered. Reed arched an eyebrow, pausing mid-stroke with his knife. "Gonna have to be more specific." Velra's silver-white eyes flicked toward him, full of something unreadable. "This? All of it? You? Me?" She hesitated, then shot a look toward Ceres. "Her." Ceres didn't react, but Reed caught the slight shift in her expression, a flicker of something deep in those golden eyes. Velra shook her head. "It's dangerous." Reed let out a slow breath, setting the knife down. "You're not wrong." Velra blinked, as if she had expected him to argue. "This is dangerous," Reed continued, leaning back on his palms. "We're in the middle of a jungle, running from a species that would rather see us dead than free. We're probably outnumbered, outgunned, and low on supplies." His lips curled into a humorless smirk. "If you're just now realizing that, I'm worried about you." Velra's jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant." Reed already knew that. He tilted his head slightly. "Then say what you do mean." Velra's fingers curled into fists. She let out a frustrated breath, looking away. "You don't understand." Ceres finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "Then explain it to us." Velra stiffened. For a moment Reed thought she would walk away, disappear into the jungle and let this conversation drown in silence. But then she turned back, silver eyes sharp with something almost desperate. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to trust this, how to trust you." Something tightened in Reed's chest. Velra was a fighter, a survivor. She had spent her life relying on herself, never allowing herself to need anyone. But here she was, standing in front of him, admitting something he suspected she had never admitted to anyone before. "I don't know how to let myself feel this," she said, quieter now, "because every time I've let someone in, I've lost them." Sarah sat forward slightly, watching her closely. "You think if you don't let it happen, you can't lose it." Velra's throat bobbed as she swallowed. "I know it." The words hung between them. Reed exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. He could feel the weight behind what she was saying, the years of loss and survival carved into every syllable. "Velra," he said carefully, "I can't promise you that this ends well. I can't promise that we make it out of this alive, or that we don't lose people along the way." He met her gaze, steady and unwavering. "But I can promise you that if you keep running from it, you're already losing something." Velra didn't answer, didn't look away. And that was when Reed knew he had finally gotten to her. Ceres shifted slightly, standing up. She moved toward Velra, not aggressively, not quickly, just close enough that the space between them grew smaller. "I don't believe in fate," Ceres murmured, "but I believe in choice." Velra tensed as Ceres reached out, fingertips barely brushing against her wrist. A test, a question. Velra didn't move, didn't pull away. But she didn't lean into it either. Ceres's golden eyes softened. "Not everything ends in loss." Reed watched as something cracked in Velra's expression, not broken, just enough to let the light in. Velra closed her eyes for a brief second, as if steadying herself. When she opened them, she exhaled shakily. She looked at Saris first, then at Reed. She didn't speak, but she stayed. And for now that was enough. The jungle never truly slept. Even in the stillness of the night, the air was thick with the scent of damp earth, the distant call of nocturnal predators, and the rustling of unseen creatures shifting through the undergrowth. The storm had passed, leaving behind a dense humidity that clung to their skin and a sky so dark it swallowed the stars. Reed Taverner sat with his back against a fallen tree, the bark rough against his damp shirt. His knife rested in his palm, his fingers absently running along the worn grip. Across from him, Saris was crouched near their small fire pit, her golden eyes scanning the jungle as if expecting something to emerge from the darkness at any moment. Her emerald-green skin still glistened faintly from the earlier rain, the golden veins along her arms reflecting the weak light. Velra stood at the edge of the clearing, her silver-white gaze fixed on something beyond the trees. The flickering glow from the embers danced along her violet skin, highlighting the sharp angles of her face, the tension in her shoulders. She hadn't moved in the past few minutes, hadn't spoken since their conversation earlier, but she was still there. Here. And that meant something. Reed exhaled and sat forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "All right," he muttered, breaking the silence. "We've been sitting in the dark long enough. What's the plan?" Velra's gaze flicked to him, sharp but guarded. "We move." Ceres tilted her head slightly. "Because?" Velra's jaw tightened. "Because we don't have a choice." She gestured toward the jungle. "They're coming." Reed stiffened, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his knife. "How do you know?" Velra turned fully to face them, arms crossed. "Because the Draxith aren't stupid. They'll assume we haven't gotten far, and they'll be right." Saris frowned. "Then why wait until now to tell us?" Velra hesitated, and that hesitation told Reed everything he needed to know. "You didn't want to say it," he said quietly, watching her closely. "Because saying it means you have to trust us to get out of it alive." Velra's silver eyes flashed. "That's not—" She cut herself off, exhaling sharply. Then, softer, she admitted, "Maybe." Reed pushed himself to his feet, rolling his shoulders to shake off the stiffness. "All right," he said, "then let's not waste any more time." Sarah stood as well, adjusting the straps of her makeshift pack. "Where do we go?" Velra's eyes flicked toward the east. "There's a ridge about 2 clicks from here. High ground, natural cover. If we can get there before they close in, we'll have the advantage." Reed nodded. "Then let's move." They moved fast, their footsteps silent against the wet jungle floor. The moon was barely visible through the thick canopy, casting only faint beams of light to guide their way. Reed kept pace with Velra, matching her quick, measured steps. He could feel the tension radiating from her. She was still on edge, still resisting something, but she hadn't run. She hadn't pushed them away. That was progress. Ceres followed just behind, her golden eyes scanning the trees with a quiet intensity. She was always watching, always calculating, always a step ahead in ways that Reed had started to rely on without even realizing it. Then she tensed. Reed and Velra froze instantly. Sears crouched low, pressing a hand against the damp soil, her expression unreadable. Reed moved closer. "What is it?" Ceres lifted her head, listening. "They're here." Velra swore under her breath. Reed's grip tightened on his weapon. "How close?" Ceres inhaled, then exhaled slowly. "Too close." As if on cue, the jungle erupted with sound. A distant guttural howl cut through the night, followed by the unmistakable crackle of movement. Heavy boots against wet earth, the snapping of branches, the low hum of energy weapons being primed. "They found our trail," Velra hissed. Reed's pulse quickened, but his mind was already working. "Then we make them lose it." Velra glanced at him. "And how do you suggest we do that?" Reed grinned. We split up. Sarah's frowned. That's a terrible idea. Not if we do it right, Reed countered. They'll assume we'll stay together, which means if we divide their forces, we have a better shot at getting out alive. Velra didn't look convinced. But Cirrus, after a moment, nodded. It could work. Velra exhaled sharply. Fine. But if we get killed, I'm blaming you. Reed smirked. Noted. They moved quickly, splitting off into separate directions, each taking a different path through the jungle. The Draxith weren't far behind now, their guttural voices carrying through the trees. Reed moved with practiced ease, slipping through the undergrowth like a shadow. He could hear them, the rhythmic stomp of boots, the low growl of their language. They were close, too close. Then, a shout, a flash of movement. A warning shot struck a tree near his head, sending bark flying. They had found him. Reed swore and ducked low, darting through the trees as plasma fire lit up the darkness behind him. He weaved through the foliage, pushing his body harder, faster, his ribs screaming in protest, his lungs burning. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the gunfire stopped. Reed pressed himself against a tree, breathing hard. He listened, waited. Nothing. Then, a rustling from above. Reed barely had time to react before something dropped from the canopy, tackling one of the Draxith to the ground with a vicious snarl. Velra. Her silver-white eyes gleamed in the darkness, her blade flashing as she struck with precision, cutting through the soldier's armor like it was nothing. Reed didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, taking down the second before he could fire a shot. The fight was quick, brutal, over in seconds. They stood there, catching their breath, the bodies cooling at their feet. Velra wiped her blade on her thigh, her violet skin streaked with mud and sweat. I thought we were supposed to be splitting up. Reed smirked. Yeah, well, guess I don't take orders well. Velra shook her head, but there was something almost amused in her expression. Then Saris appeared from the shadows, silent as a ghost. We need to go. Reed nodded. Agreed. Velra hesitated, glancing at him. You still think this isn't a mistake? Reed met her gaze, unwavering, more than ever. For a moment she didn't respond. Then, slowly, hesitantly, she nodded. They moved together, fading into the jungle once more. And this time, Velra didn't keep her distance. She didn't run. She stayed. Dawn broke over the jungle in muted shades of gold and violet, the first hints of light filtering through the thick canopy. The air was still damp from the night's rain, clinging to their skin as they moved carefully through the undergrowth. The distant hum of insects filled the quiet spaces between their footsteps, blending with the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of an unseen creature. They had made it through the night, barely. Reed Tavner adjusted the strap of his pack, his ribs aching with each step. His body was exhausted, but his mind was sharper than ever. The Draxith were still out there, and he had no illusions about their determination. They wouldn't stop hunting, wouldn't give up until every trace of them had been wiped from existence. But for the first time in days, Reed wasn't thinking about just surviving. He glanced sideways at Velra. She moved ahead of him, her posture tense but controlled, her silver-white eyes scanning the jungle like she expected an attack at any moment. Her violet skin, still streaked with mud and sweat from their last skirmish, gleamed faintly in the soft morning light. She looked like she belonged here, like she had been carved from the jungle itself. Cirrus walked beside him, her emerald-green skin smooth and unblemished despite everything they had been through. Her golden markings caught the light as she moved, her gaze calm but alert. She was always watching, always thinking, balancing instinct with logic in a way that Reed had come to admire more than he wanted to admit. For the past few days their focus had been survival, but now something had shifted. They weren't just running anymore. They were moving toward something. Velra spoke first. The ridge should be close. Her voice was steady, but there was something different in it now, something less rigid, less guarded. Ceres glanced up at the sky through the canopy. If we get there before mid-morning, we'll have a clear view of the valley. We can figure out our next move. Reed nodded. Let's not waste time then. They pressed on, navigating the uneven terrain in practiced silence. The jungle grew denser as they climbed, the humid air thick with the scent of wet leaves and rich soil. Every step felt heavier than the last, exhaustion weighing them down, but none of them hesitated. Not anymore. They reached the ridge just as the sun began to rise over the distant mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape. The view was vast, rolling forests stretching out below them, cut through by winding rivers and jagged cliffs. And far in the distance, barely visible against the horizon, smoke. Reed exhaled slowly. That's not a natural fire. Velra's expression darkened. Draxith patrol. Sarah studied the smoke for a long moment. They're closing in. Reed felt a familiar tension settle into his chest, but this time it wasn't just the instinctive need to run. It was something else. We need to stop them. His voice was firm, unwavering. Velra turned to him, her silver-white eyes narrowing. You're suggesting we go toward them instead of away? Reed met her gaze without hesitation. If we don't, they'll keep hunting us, and anyone else who gets in their way. Velra was silent for a moment, then she let out a slow breath. You're insane. Reed smirked. Maybe. Cirrus crossed her arms. What's the plan? Reed turned back toward the valley, his mind already working through possibilities. They were outnumbered but not outmatched. They had the terrain. They had experience. And for the first time, they had each other. He looked at Velra, then at Ceres. We fight. Neither of them argued. Neither of them hesitated. The Draxith were relentless, their numbers overwhelming, but Reed, Velra, and Ceres fought with a desperation that turned the jungle into a battlefield. Reed's rifle ran hot, plasma fire cutting through the trees. Velra moved through the chaos like a phantom, her blade finding every weakness, every exposed joint in their armor. Ceres fought with deadly precision, every shot a calculated strike. But they couldn't hold forever. Reed ducked behind cover, his breath ragged. Velra was beside him, blood streaking her violet skin, though none of it seemed to be hers. Ceres crouched behind a tree, scanning the battlefield with sharp golden eyes. They were outnumbered, outgunned. And then, a sound, a deep, reverberating thrum from the sky above. Reed looked up and his heart clenched. A Draxith dropship. Velra cursed. They brought reinforcements. Cirrus' hands tightened around her weapon. We can't stay here. Reed's mind raced. They had fought too hard to be cornered now. There had to be a way out. And then he saw it. A narrow path leading down the ridge, a steep drop but survivable. If they could make it, they could disappear into the jungle below. He turned to Velra and Ceres. We're not winning this fight. Velra frowned. So what's the plan? Reed nodded toward the drop. Velra followed his gaze, then looked back at him. You're insane. Reed grinned. Starting to sound familiar, huh? Ceres exhaled. We don't have another option. The dropship engines roared above them. The Draxith were closing in. Reed took one last look at them. At Velra, her silver eyes burning with determination. At Ceres, her calm resolve unwavering. Then he took a step back and jumped. Velra and Ceres followed without hesitation. The world blurred in a rush of motion as they tumbled through the foliage, hitting the ground hard. Pain shot through Reed's body, but he pushed himself up, adrenaline keeping him moving. They had survived. For now. Velra groaned, sitting up. Remind me why I listened to you? Reed smirked. Because I haven't gotten us killed yet. Ceres dusted herself off. We need to move before they regroup. Reed nodded, his body aching but his mind sharp. They weren't out of this yet. But they were still together. The jungle was alive with the quiet hum of predators and the distant guttural voices of the Draxith. The moonlight barely pierced the thick canopy, leaving only faint silver streaks on the damp forest floor. The air smelled of earth and smoke. The Draxith had been burning through the jungle, clearing a path, searching. Reed, Velra, and Ceres crouched behind the twisted roots of an ancient tree, just outside the perimeter of the Draxith encampment. There, Ceres pointed toward a clearing ahead. A Draxith dropship was parked on a rocky outcrop, its dark hull gleaming under the artificial floodlights. A dozen guards patrolled the area, their reptilian figures silhouetted against the glow. "That's our way off this rock," Reed murmured. Velra's silver-white eyes narrowed. "And how exactly do you plan to take it without getting shot full of holes?" Reed smirked. "Creativity." Ceres let out a soft breath, her golden eyes scanning the area. "We'll need a distraction, something big enough to draw them away from the ship." Velra's lips curled slightly. "I think I can handle that." Reed glanced at her. "Not if it gets you killed." Velra's expression darkened. "I've come too far for that." For a brief moment, neither of them looked away. Then, finally, Reed nodded. "All right. Ceres, can you disable their comms?" Ceres tapped the small device she had salvaged earlier. "Already working on it." Velra unsheathed her blade, her violet skin blending with the deep shadows. "Then let's cause some chaos." Ceres moved first, slipping through the undergrowth like a ghost. She reached a Draxith command post, a small tent filled with data consoles and communication relays. Her fingers worked quickly, slicing through security protocols with practiced ease. Within seconds, the Draxith comms went dark. Velra was next. She emerged from the shadows near a storage area and set fire to their supply crates, sending up a column of thick black smoke. The flame spread rapidly, igniting spare fuel canisters. A loud explosion ripped through the night, sending Draxith soldiers scattering in confusion. Alarms blared. Shouts filled the jungle. The guards around the dropship turned toward the chaos, exactly as planned. Reed used the distraction to move. He sprinted toward the ship, pressing himself against the cold metal hull. His hands worked quickly, hot-wiring the ship's security panel. "Ceres, I need that lockdown lifted," he whispered into his comm. "Almost there," Ceres replied, her voice tense. Velra cut through a pair of Draxith who had rushed toward the flames. Her movements were quick, precise, a blur of violet skin and flashing steel. "Reed, tell me you're in," she shouted. Reed gritted his teeth. "Almost." The ship's panel flashed green. "I'm in." The commander arrives. But just as the dropship's engines roared to life, a deep, guttural voice rang through the clearing. "You think you can steal from me, prey?" A massive Draxith warrior stepped forward, his crimson eyes locking onto Velra. His armor was heavier than the others, decorated with battle scars and trophies. A warlord. Velra froze, her grip tightening on her blade. Reed cursed. "Not now." Ceres' voice crackled over the comm. "Reed, get the ship off the ground now." Velra squared her stance. "Go. I'll handle this." Reed's blood ran cold. "The hell you will." Velra smirked. "Don't worry about me, soldier. Just don't wreck the ship before I get there." The warlord lunged. Velra barely dodged in time, rolling to the side as the Draxith's massive blade slammed into the ground, splintering the earth. She countered with a swift slash, but his armor absorbed the impact. "Velra, move!" Reed shouted. The warlord swung again. This time, Velra wasn't fast enough. The blade sliced across her arm, drawing a deep gash. She stumbled back, biting down a curse. The warlord laughed. "Weak." Reed's heart pounded. He had seconds to make a choice. Velra met his eyes, her silver gaze fierce despite the pain. "Get on the damn ship, Reed." Sirius's voice cut through the calm. "Reed, if we don't leave now, we never will." Reed swore under his breath. Then he made his choice. He raised his weapon, took one perfect shot, and buried a plasma bolt into the warlord's exposed shoulder. The Draxith roared in fury, staggering back just enough for Velra to drive her blade into his chest. The warlord gasped, crimson eyes wide in shock. Velra twisted the blade, then yanked it free. The Draxith collapsed, unmoving. She didn't hesitate. She turned and ran. The jungle erupted with gunfire. More Draxith soldiers were closing in. Velra sprinted for the ship, her injured arm hanging useless at her side. Reed was already in the pilot's seat, flipping switches, powering up the thrusters. Come on, come on." Velra jumped onto the boarding ramp just as Sarah slammed the hatch shut behind her. The ship lifted off, engines roaring as the jungle blurred below them. "They're launching fighters," Saris warned. Reed gritted his teeth. "Then let's hope this thing has some firepower." Velra collapsed into a seat, breathing hard, pressing a hand to her bleeding arm. Reed glanced back at her. "You good?" She smirked, despite the pain. "You hesitated." Reed let out a short laugh. "Yeah, guess I did." Ceres interrupted. "Reed, now would be a good time to fly faster." Reed snapped back to the controls just as a warning alarm blared. Enemy ships were closing in. They weren't free yet, but they had their way out. Now, they just had to survive the next few minutes. The ship rocked violently as enemy fire slammed into its hull. Alarms blared through the cockpit, warning of critical damage. The jungle below shrank rapidly as they climbed toward the atmosphere, but they weren't free yet. 3 Draxith fighter ships were in pursuit, weapons locked and ready to tear them out of the sky. Reed gritted his teeth, gripping the controls as he pushed the ship to its limits. "Saris, tell me you've got that jump drive online." Ceres, strapped into the co-pilot's seat, her golden eyes narrowed with focus, furiously worked through the ship's outdated system. "It's fried. Looks like this ship was grounded for repairs. I need time to reroute power." Velra, still clutching her injured arm, strapped herself into the seat behind them. "I hate to be the pessimist here, but we don't have time." The ship lurched as another plasma blast struck their left wing. The console flickered, sending warning signals across the dashboard. Reed exhaled sharply. "Then we make time." He yanked the controls hard to the left, throwing the ship into a sudden barrel roll. The Draxith fighters adjusted, but one overshot the turn, exposing its flank. Velra seized the opportunity. "Guns are hot. I've got this one." Her violet fingers flew across the targeting console, locking onto the enemy's ship. With a smirk, she fired. A blast of energy surged from their cannons, striking the Draxith fighter dead on. It exploded in a fiery burst, debris scattering in the atmosphere. "On down," she said, breathless. 2 to go. Reed pushed the engines harder, the ship groaning under the strain. The stars above flickered in and out of focus as they neared the upper atmosphere. The air around them burned with friction, leaving a fiery wake in their path. Another impact rocked them. The shields were barely holding. Ceres slammed her fist against the console. "I almost have it. Just a few more seconds." Velra cursed as the remaining 2 Draxith fighters broke formation, one circling ahead to cut them off, the other moving into attack position behind them. "We're boxed in," Reed muttered. "Any brilliant ideas?" Velra narrowed her silver-white eyes. "Yeah. Fly straight at them." Reed blinked. "That's not a plan." "Trust me," Velra said. Saris, still rerouting the ship's power, glanced up. "I swear, if you 2 get us killed." Reed smirked and pitched the ship forward, heading directly for the enemy fighter. The Draxith pilot hesitated for half a second, exactly what Velra was counting on. With a well-placed shot, she sent a blast directly into the fighter's cockpit. The enemy ship spiraled out of control, plummeting toward the planet below. "On left," she muttered. The last Draxith fighter fired a missile. Cirrus paled. Missile lock, impact in 5 seconds. Reed acted on instinct. He pulled the ship into a sharp vertical climb, pushing the engines past their limit. The missile followed, tracking their heat signature. "Ceres?" he called, voice tight. "Almost there," she shot back, hands flying over the controls. 4 seconds. 3. The missile closed in. 2. Ceres slammed her fist onto the console. "Now!" The ship jumped to hyperspace. For a brief second, the explosion of the missile flared behind them, but then, silence. A deep, endless black stretched before them. Stars shimmered in all directions, stretching into infinity. They had escaped. Reed let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Velra exhaled, staring at the stars. "Holy shit." Ceres leaned back in her seat, pressing a hand to her chest. "I need a drink." Reed chuckled, his muscles finally loosening. "I'll take one, too." They had done it. Against impossible odds, they had escaped the Draxith, stolen a ship, and left that cursed planet behind. But as the adrenaline faded, a new question settled between them. What now? Reed turned in his seat to look at Velra and Ceres. "So, where to next?" Ceres was the first to answer. "There's a colony on the edge of Draxith-controlled space. It's neutral territory, no wars, no tracking. We could start there." Velra raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we just retire?" Ceres smirked. "I'm suggesting we breathe for once." Reed nodded. "We'll need to lay low, rest, figure things out." He met Velra's gaze. "Unless you have a better idea?" Velra hesitated. Her entire life had been about surviving, fighting, running. She had never once stopped to consider what came after. And yet, for the first time in her life, she wasn't alone. She looked at Reed, then at Ceres, and she realized she didn't want to run anymore. Velra exhaled, rolling her shoulders. "Fine, we go to the colony, but if we get bored, I say we start a revolution." Reed grinned. "Sounds like a plan." Ceres shook her head with a small smile. "I should have known you'd say that." Reed turned back to the controls, adjusting their heading. "All right then. Next stop, freedom." The stars stretched out before them, endless and waiting. And for the first time, they weren't just surviving, they were choosing a future. Together, the colony was unlike anything Reed had expected. Nestled between towering cliffs and stretching dunes, Haven's Rest was a refuge for those who had slipped between the cracks of the galaxy. Smugglers, ex-soldiers, wanderers with nowhere else to go. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions, where pasts were left at the door. After days of drifting through the void, dodging patrols and scanning for safe harbor, they had finally arrived. The landing was smooth, the stolen Draxith ship slotting neatly into the colony's underground docking bays. As the engines powered down, a strange sensation settled over Reed. For the first time in what felt like years, they weren't being hunted. No alarms, no gunfire, just silence. Ceres was the first to unbuckle, stretching her arms over her head with a slow exhale. "We made it." Velra, still lounging in the co-pilot's chair, smirked. "Told you we wouldn't die." Reed scoffed. "That was debatable for a while there." She flashed him a grin, silver-white eyes gleaming under the soft glow of the cockpit lights. "You love the adrenaline. Don't lie." Ceres rolled her eyes. "Can we at least pretend to enjoy peace before you start looking for the next fight?" Velra shrugged. "No promises." Reed chuckled, shaking his head. He stood, stretching the stiffness from his muscles. "Come on, let's see what this place has to offer." Night came slowly to Haven's Rest, painting the sky with hues of indigo and velvet violet. Tiny specks of starlight shimmered through the transparent shielding above the colony, a delicate reminder of the vast galaxy they'd fled from. A galaxy where they'd always been running, hunted, and chased. But here, tonight, there were no dangers lurking in the shadows, no echoes of blaster fire to disturb their sleep. There was only the peaceful silence of a newfound sanctuary, broken occasionally by distant murmurs of laughter and muted conversations. Inside their rented unit, the lights had been dimmed to a soft amber glow. Warmth lingered comfortably in the cozy space, wrapping the trio in gentle contentment. Ceres reclined on the plush sofa, legs tucked beneath her elegantly, her emerald skin radiant under the soft glow. Golden markings adorned her cheekbones, wrists, and collarbone, gleaming softly in the subdued light. Her amber eyes followed Reed's movements, curious, watchful, yet deeply affectionate. Velra lounged near the balcony door, silver-white hair cascading down her slender shoulders. Her violet skin seemed to glow in the low light, her silver-white eyes thoughtful as they traced the horizon beyond the transparent barrier. Reed stood quietly near her, studying her profile. For once he felt no urgency, no pressure, just this quiet, almost surreal peace. Velra's voice broke the comfortable silence. "It's strange, isn't it?" Her tone was soft, contemplative. "What is?" Reed asked gently, stepping closer until his shoulder brushed lightly against hers. "Standing still," she said softly, voice touched with quiet awe. "I've forgotten how." He smiled softly, turning to face her fully. "Maybe it's time to remember." She tilted her head slightly, studying his face. Her eyes were deep pools of silver, reflecting emotions she rarely allowed others to glimpse. "With you," she whispered, voice raw, open, vulnerable. "I think I might." Reed's breath caught, his heart speeding gently at the honesty in her words. "Velra," he murmured softly, reaching out to brush a strand of her silvery hair from her cheek. "You're not alone anymore. We're here." Velra exhaled slowly, allowing her eyes to drift closed for just a moment, savoring his gentle touch. Then she opened them, gaze lingering on Reed's lips, soft and inviting. Her voice was low, husky with anticipation. "Prove it." Without hesitation, he leaned forward, capturing her mouth in a slow, tender kiss. It began as a gentle exploration, delicate and meaningful, filled with the weight of trust they'd built through countless dangers. Gradually the kiss deepened, melting from cautious exploration to quiet intensity, their breaths mingling, hearts beating in shared rhythm. Velra sighed softly against his lips, fingers curling into the front of his shirt, drawing him closer, bodies pressed intimately together. From her spot on the couch, Ceres watched quietly, golden eyes sparkling with warmth, affection, and something deeper, anticipation. When Reed finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against Velra's, breaths mingling softly. "Still doubting?" She chuckled softly, a rare, genuine sound filled with warmth. "Not anymore." Reed turned slightly, his gaze seeking out Ceres, who watched with patient amusement. "And you?" he asked softly, extending his hand toward her. "Are you ready to trust this?" Ceres rose gracefully, moving toward them, accepting his outstretched hand with gentle certainty. "I trusted you both a long time ago. This," her voice dropped to an intimate murmur, golden eyes shining gently, "this was inevitable." She moved close, her delicate fingers tracing patterns over Reed's jaw, then down to Velra's neck. "No more running. No more hiding." Velra smiled softly, her eyes holding Ceres's gaze for a long, gentle heartbeat. Then she leaned forward, lips brushing delicately against Ceres's in an achingly gentle kiss. Their kiss was slower, softer, but filled with quiet intensity, a declaration of trust, acceptance, and growing desire. Reed watched the two women, breath caught in his throat, pulse quickening in appreciation. Velra pulled away gently, her expression softer than he'd ever seen. Turning back toward Reed, she smiled slowly, eyes heavy-lidded. "Tonight, let's remember what it's like to feel alive." He understood exactly what she meant. Velra led Reed slowly toward the bedroom, her fingers intertwined with his. Saras followed gracefully, amber eyes glistening with quiet anticipation, each step deliberate and graceful. Inside the quiet warmth of their shared space, the three stood silently, each heartbeat echoing clearly in the gentle hush. Reed's fingers grazed Velra's collarbone, tracing down gently, making her inhale softly. His other hand brushed Saras's waist, tracing slow, delicate circles along her side, making her shiver quietly. Velra stepped closer to Reed, gently guiding him toward the softness of their shared bed. He allowed himself to sit on the edge, watching curiously as Velra straddled his hips, slowly, gracefully. Her silver-white eyes locked onto his, heavy with emotion. "I've never," she admitted quietly, voice a soft confession in the dimness, "I've never felt safe enough to do this, to take my time, to enjoy it." He caressed her cheek, gently pulling her into another deep, unhurried kiss. "Then take your time," he whispered, his voice low, encouraging, filled with warmth. "We have all the time in the galaxy." She smiled, breathing softly, feeling his warmth beneath her. Her body melted into his touch, heat building slowly between them. When she gently moved against him, testing the sensation, she gasped softly, delighted and surprised by the intensity of the feeling. Behind them, Saras moved gracefully, sliding onto the bed beside them. Her emerald green skin glistened beautifully, illuminated by amber lighting. She gently placed soft kisses along Velra's shoulder and neck, whispering softly, reassuringly. "Feel everything," Saras murmured tenderly. "We're here with you." Velra sighed, leaning into their touches, sensations overwhelming her in ways she'd never imagined possible. Trust, safety, pleasure, love, all intertwining into something extraordinary, something powerful. Slowly, deliberately, the three moved in careful unison, touches becoming deeper, more intimate, filled with quiet intensity and gentle urgency. Their bodies became beautifully entangled, breathing softly, gasping quietly, whispering tender affirmations as their connection intensified. Velra shuddered softly atop Reed, her fingers curling tightly into his shoulders, waves of warmth and delight moving through her. Behind her, Saras pressed close, her fingers tracing Velra's spine, murmuring soft praises and gentle encouragement. With gentle movements, Reed held Velra securely, guiding her slow, beautiful rhythm, watching her exquisite expressions of pleasure and trust unfold. Her soft cries of enjoyment filled the room, harmonizing beautifully with Saras's quiet, sensual encouragements and Reed's whispered affirmations. Time became irrelevant. Finally, gently, beautifully, they came to rest, breath slowing into quiet, satisfied rhythms. Velra leaned forward, forehead resting softly against Reed's shoulder, Saras curling protectively behind her, their bodies perfectly intertwined. The quiet, gentle hush of the night embraced them, three souls finally finding safety, trust, love, and acceptance within each other. No more running, no more fear, only peace. As the soft waves of warmth settled into gentle tranquility, Velra slowly lifted herself, breathing still heavy and skin flushed beautifully in the dim amber glow. She glanced tenderly over her shoulder at Saras, eyes shimmering with a depth of feeling she'd rarely allowed herself to express openly. Saras met her gaze, golden eyes glowing softly with affection, desire, and quiet patience. She had watched, felt, and shared in Velra's profound vulnerability, and now her heartbeat quickened with anticipation. Reed reached out, fingers brushing softly along Saras's delicate emerald skin, drawing her closer with gentle intent. "Now," he murmured warmly, voice low and filled with reassurance, "it's your turn." A small, playful smile curved Saras's lips. "Is it?" Velra smiled softly, moving gracefully aside, gently guiding Saras into Reed's arms. "Yes," she whispered, her voice a tender, intimate promise. Let us take care of you." Ceres allowed herself to be gently drawn into Reed's embrace, feeling the quiet strength and warmth of his body pressing gently against hers. Her breathing grew deeper, anticipation fluttering warmly in her chest. For so long, she'd hidden behind barriers, refusing to allow anyone close enough to truly touch her heart. Tonight, those walls crumbled entirely. Reed gently cupped her face, brushing his thumb along her golden markings, marveling quietly at their delicate beauty. Ceres's breath hitched softly, eyes drifting closed briefly, savoring the intimate sensation of being seen, adored, cherished. Then his mouth found hers in a kiss so gentle, so deliberate, that Ceres felt a rush of warmth spread from her chest throughout her entire body. She sighed softly against his lips, surrendering fully to the tenderness he offered, her body slowly molding into his as the kiss grew deeper, more passionate. Behind her, Velra moved closer, fingers delicately caressing Ceres's bare shoulders, tracing slow, sensual patterns down her back. Soft, barely audible murmurs of reassurance filled Ceres's ears as Velra gently kissed her neck, each touch sending sparks of delight dancing across her sensitive skin. Ceres exhaled shakily, overwhelmed by the exquisite sensation of being lovingly surrounded, embraced fully by those she'd come to trust above all others. Reed's hands moved slowly downward, exploring her curves with reverent tenderness, eliciting soft gasps and whispers of approval. "I never thought," Ceres murmured softly, voice trembling slightly, vulnerability clear in every whispered word. "I never thought I'd have this." Velra's voice, soft and gentle, brushed warmly against Ceres's ear. "You deserve this." Ceres shivered softly, leaning her head back against Velra's shoulder as Reed continued his slow, deliberate exploration. Gentle, patient hands ignited trails of warmth along her emerald skin, teasing out quiet gasps and delicate moans she had long kept hidden. Reed watched her expressions intently, finding deep satisfaction in every subtle reaction, every shudder of pleasure. Velra's soft kisses trailed slowly downward, tracing a heated, delicate path along Ceres's shoulder blades, along her spine, heightening every exquisite sensation. The tenderness was intoxicating, beautifully overwhelming, and Ceres allowed herself to be guided onto the soft bed beneath them. Reed shifted his weight carefully, moving slowly, deliberately, settling above her, eyes meeting Ceres's gaze with gentle intensity. "Trust us," he murmured softly, gently positioning himself between her thighs, moving with careful restraint and affectionate warmth. Ceres's breathing quickened gently, anticipation building steadily. She reached up, fingertips tracing Reed's jaw, feeling the heat radiating between their bodies. "I already do," she whispered, voice shaking softly with raw honesty. With aching slowness, Reed moved, joining their bodies in an exquisite, tender union that drew soft cries of delight from Ceres's lips. Her eyes widened momentarily, filled with wonder at the profound intimacy of the moment. Her fingers curled tightly around Reed's shoulders, anchoring herself as waves of sensation rolled gently through her. Velra lay beside them, watching intently, silver-white eyes filled with affection and deep satisfaction. Her fingers moved softly, caressing Ceres's cheek, whispering soft encouragement as Reed moved slowly, deliberately within her. "You're beautiful like this," Velra murmured softly, admiration clear in every gentle word. "Open, trusting, ours." Ceres shuddered softly, the tenderness of Velra's words intensifying every sensation Reed gave her, building slowly toward a powerful, breathtaking release. Each slow, deep movement drew out gentle gasps, soft cries, and whispered affirmations from Ceres, who had never felt more alive, more loved, more seen than in this perfect moment. Reed's breathing deepened, matching Ceres's rhythm. Their eyes locked together, sharing an intimacy far deeper than merely physical. Finally, gently, beautifully, pleasure crested within Ceres, a wave of intense warmth flooding her senses. She arched gracefully beneath Reed, breathlessly whispering his and Velra's names as she found sweet release, vulnerable and utterly safe in their arms. In that tender, perfect aftermath, Reed held her securely, whispering soft affirmations against her neck, while Velra pressed lovingly against Ceres's side, fingers gently brushing through her hair, murmuring words of comfort and deep affection. Together they lay quietly, hearts beating in unison, breathing gradually slowing into gentle, contented rhythms. In this moment, in this quiet embrace, three souls found peace, sanctuary, and love. No longer hunted, no longer alone. Ceres smiled softly, eyes drifting closed, overwhelmed by love, trust, and the quiet promise of forever. At last, she'd found hope. Days passed. Their wounds healed. They settled into something almost resembling normalcy, waking up without fear, eating food that wasn't ration packs, learning what it meant to live rather than just exist. Velra still couldn't sit still for long, always searching for the next challenge, the next thrill. But she chose to come home. Ceres found herself relaxing for the first time in years, letting her guard down in ways she never had before. And Reed? He had spent his life waiting for the next war, the next mission, the next battle. Now he had something else, something worth staying for. One evening, as the sun set over Haven's Rest, casting golden light across the rooftops, Reed sat on the balcony, watching Velra and Ceres talk, arguing playfully about some ridiculous bet. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, he felt at peace. Velra caught him staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" Reed smirked. "Nothing." Ceres leaned back against the railing, golden eyes narrowing. "That's not a nothing look." Reed just shook his head, stretching his arms behind his head. "Just thinking." Velra smirked. "Dangerous." He laughed, shaking his head. "Not this time." Because for the first time the future wasn't just a question mark. It was theirs. And whatever came next, they would face it together.